Kurt Godel confessed that he believed he was a complete failure despite revolutionizing mathematics. He was so extraordinary that Albert Einstein once said he would go to his office every day just to have the privilege of being permitted to walk home with Kurt Godel. Godel's most famous contribution is his incompleteness theorem, which shook the foundation of mathematics, revealing that there are truths within any mathematical system that cannot be proven by the system itself. The statement cannot be proven within the system. In his final days, he refused to eat, and when he died, he weighed only 65 pounds. To understand Godel's profound discovery and deep-seated insecurities, we must go back to his beginnings. Godel entered the world on April 28, 1906 in Brno, known as Brno, the Czech Republic, which was then part of the safe and stable Austro-Hungarian Empire. His family lived a privileged life thanks to his father's success in running a large textile company. As a young boy, Godel was known as Mr. Y, always questioning everything around him. He excelled in school, earning a very good in all subjects, with the exception of a good in mathematics. Ironically, Godel enrolled at the University of Vienna, where he had planned on studying mathematics. He changed his mind after encountering the renowned math professor Philip Furtwängler, who was paralyzed from the neck down and lectured from a wheelchair. Inspired by the charismatic professor, Godel switched his focus to pure mathematics. He soon became a member of the Vienna Circle, a group of intellectuals who met every other Thursday to discuss philosophy, science, and mathematics. Most members were strong proponents of logical positivism, the belief that only truths can be empirically verified or logically proven are meaningful. But Godel challenged this view. His famous theorem revealed that some meaningful mathematical truths cannot be proven within any formal system. When he was just 24 years old, he announced his groundbreaking incompleteness theorem, declaring at a conference in September 1930. There are mathematical problems that can be expressed in Principia Mathematica, which cannot be solved by the logical means of Principia Mathematica. Although his complex theorem is abstract, it can be understood through a simple analogy, the liar paradox. Consider the statement. The statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false, as it claims. But if it's false, then it must be true. This creates a paradox where the statement cannot be consistently labeled true or false. Similarly, Godel's theorem showed that within any formal mathematical system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven using the system's rules. His theorem applies to any system capable of expressing arithmetic. Even with the help of a computer, there will always be truths that the system itself cannot prove. Godel's revelation, published in 1931, shocked the mathematical community. The brilliant mathematician John von Neumann immediately grasped its significance, later declaring, "It is a landmark which will remain visible far in space and time." Author Stefan Budiansky, who wrote a remarkable biography, the proof itself was a feat of mathematical wizardry, so extraordinary that its conception and execution were as awe-striking as the result. Godel's proof has that air of unconstructed inspiration, of having seen the whole glance, like the counter-subjects of a Bach fugue that work perfectly together at the moment when they meet halfway through or turn of a sonnet where thought, rhythm, and rhyme combine. However, not everyone welcomed Godel's discovery. It is directly challenged by the philosophy of David Hilbert, who was the mathematician at the time, who claimed there is nothing unknowable in mathematics. Godel proved this was not true, despite the professor's argument. His position as a Privatdozent at the University of Vienna allowed him to lecture, but without a salary. He only received a small fee for each student enrolled in his courses. After losing his mentor, Godel checked himself into a sanatorium, a mental institution where he refused to eat, convinced that the doctors were trying to poison him. His girlfriend Adele, a former nightclub dancer, became his lifeline. Despite his parents' disapproval of their relationship, Adele stood by Godel, even taking the first bite of his food to reassure him that it was safe to eat. Decades later, he confided to his psychiatrist that he had lived in constant fear of being arrested and charged after Adele had a miscarriage. They were not married, and Adele was previously married, and under Austrian law at the time, civil divorce was not permitted for Catholics. The final nail in the coffin that caused Goldberg to spiral out of control came in 1936. His former professor, Moritz Schlick, was murdered by a deranged former. Nell Bloch became a martyr of the anti-Semitic right, despite the fact that Professor Schlick, Nell Bloch, wasn't Jewish but was associated with the Jewish intelligentsia. In March 1998, when the Nazis took over Austria, Nell Bloch was paroled. Many of Godel's colleagues fled to America, but Godel naively believed his future still remained in Austria. Despite invitations from prestigious American institutions, he was reluctant to leave, still clinging to the hope of securing a permanent position at the University of Vienna. However, the Nazis viewed Godel with suspicion. Although he wasn't Jewish, many of his friends and colleagues in his profession were, and he was associated with them. As financial support dwindled after his father's death, Godel realized he had no future in Austria. John von Neumann recognized Godel's immense value and urged Abraham Flexner, the head of the Institute for Advanced Study, to hire him, insisting Godel is absolutely irreplaceable. Scholars at the IAS were free to pursue research without the burden of teaching regular courses. When the Institute extended an invitation, von Neumann urgently sent a cable that read, "Invitation still valid, come as soon as possible." To persuade the Nazi officials to allow him to leave, the new IS head Frank Eildot argued that Godel's presence in America would significantly enhance the prestige of German science. Godel and his now wife Adele arrived in New York in March 1940. Although the move to America brought safety and stability, Godel never shook his feelings of inadequacy, believing that his later work, including his proof of the generalized consistency of the continuum hypothesis, fell short of his early achievement on the incompleteness theory. His psychiatrist, Dr. Philip Ehrlich, noted in their sessions the belief that he hasn't achieved his goals that he set for himself, hence a failure. Therefore, other people, particularly the Institute, will also regard him as a failure and try to get rid of him. Despite Godel's self-doubt, one of the greatest scientific minds held him in the highest regard. Albert Einstein, whose office was on the same floor as Godel's at the time, Institute of Advanced Study, cherished their daily walks together, saying, "My own work by then did not amount to much, but I came to the office just to have the privilege of being permitted to work home with Kurt Godel." In 1947, Godel prepared to become an American citizen. His friends Albert Einstein and economist Oscar, who both accompanied him, quickly intervened to steer the conversation back on track. Godel passed the exam and became a U.S. citizen in 1948. The IAS also made Godel a permanent resident. 4 years later, despite concerns about his mental state, which deteriorated further, when Godel was treated for a stomach ulcer in his early 50s, he insisted that his doctors didn't know what they were doing. Godel was extremely anxious about his health. As described in the Budiansky book, taking his temperature 3 times a day, he craved certainty and control over his health, and inherently much like the limitations and necessities revealed by his theorem. He was skeptical of evolution, believing the complexity of life couldn't be fully explained by natural selection and random mutation. He once told a colleague that the human mind was a computing machine connected with a spirit. In a letter to his mother, he wrote, "You pose in your last letter the momentous question whether I believe we shall meet in the hereafter. About that I can only say the following. If the world is constructed rationally and has a meaning, then must be so." He even completed a logical proof of the existence of God, though it wasn't empirical proof, but rather a logical argument. Even as his mind grappled with such profound and abstract concepts, Godel was increasingly besieged by paranoia. He refused much-needed prostate surgery out of fear that doctors were trying to harm him. He insisted to his psychiatrist that the IIS was after him, and they were trying to take away his pension. His brother Rudy, who remained in Austria, had been sent to the concentration camp because Godel had failed to return to Austria as promised. When Adele was hospitalized for several months following an illness, Godel slowly starved to death at home. Adele finally persuaded him to enter a hospital. During his final 2 weeks in the hospital, he refused to eat. On January 14, 1978, Kurt Godel, one of the greatest logicians there ever was, passed away. He was 71 years old. Godel revealed a profound truth about math and life. Even the more sophisticated systems have limits, that there are truths that will forever remain beyond our